Welcome to the podcast on North American literature, hosted by the research group Studies in American Literature and Culture from the University of Granada.
Turn the page, take a seat, where words and histories meet. North American minds and more. We open wide the literary door.
My name is Maria Corpas, and I'm here today with Laura Maria Sánchez Trujillo, a student in the course North American Literature 2. Today, we're going to talk about her most recent research on the influence of Emily Dickinson, especially her poem, They Shut Me Up in Prose, in Snapshot of a Daughter-in-Law, by Adrienne Rich. Thanks to her essay, Feminist Memory and Voice, Emily Dickinson and Adrienne Rich's comparison, she will give us a summary of the great discoveries she has made. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity to talk about my research of these two great influences of women's literature.
Let's start with some context. Could you tell us a bit about the author and the historical or cultural background of the text you worked on?
Absolutely. My research focuses on two influential American poets, Emily Dickinson and Adrienne Rich, and how their poetry reflects the struggle for female intellectual freedom across different historical periods. Emily Dickinson lived during the 19th century, especially the Victorian era, a time when women were expected to be passive, domestic, and devoted to family. And she lived in Massachusetts, a deeply religious and conservative town. What I found really alarming was that she wasn't widely published during her lifetime, but she was determined to have her voice heard. That's why she wrote They Shut Me Up in Prose in 1862. And you know what, Maria? Her poetry challenges the gender restriction of her time, using unconventional techniques like slant rhymes, irregular punctuation, and rich metaphors to express a quiet but powerful resistance. For everyone to understand that is like create her own and personal poetic style.
Wow, that's so interesting. I had studied about Emily Dickinson here at the University of Granada, but I wasn't very familiar with Adrienne Rich.
Then, fast forward to the 20th century, we see another major poet, who is Adrienne Rich. She was born in 1929 and became the central figure in the second wave of feminism. Her poem Snapshot of a Daughter-in-Law, published in 1963, reflects the frustrations and emotional collapse that many women felt under the patriarchal expectations, something like the situation that your grandmother used to live when she was younger. The poem is fragmented, which means that it is divided into pieces and each describes one scenario, and also there is intertextuality, that is using other poems or texts that is very modernist and postmodernist. Rich writes with a clear feminist perspective, openly challenging traditional gender roles and the idea that women's place is only in the home. Obviously, she criticizes this. So, even though Dickinson and Rich lived nearly a century apart, they share the same problem and have the same concerns, the lack of female voice and the boundaries placed on women's creativity and authority.
Tell me more about the poems. Can you give us a short summary and what makes them so significant?
Sure. Both poems explore how women's voices and creativity has been limited by societal expectations, but they do so in different ways and from different historical moments, as I said before. Emily Dickinson's They Shut Me Up in Prose is a short but powerful poem when she compares being shut as a woman to being locked in a closet when she was a little girl. It reflects her frustration with being forced into traditional roles and the expectations that women should express themselves only in certain accepted ways, like prose instead of poetry or silence instead of speech. So she, especially her mind, is like a bird that flies freely, escaping any cage or restriction. Beautiful, right?
Indeed, and snapshots of a daughter in law?
Adrienne Rich's poem is larger and fragmented. It details with the psychological and emotional effects of patriarchy on women, especially the pressure to conform, to stay quiet, and to serve men. She shows how complex and painful the experience of a woman can be through the figure of the daughter in law. But this figure can be anyone: a mother, a daughter, a sister, married, younger. The lack of identity is so significant since they can be anyone, even us. I really recommend you all to read it. Maybe you can see yourself in the poem even if you are in the 21st century. So even though the poems are different in form and style, both challenge the limit places on women's expectation and question how much space women are given to speak, think, or create freely.
Let's move on. Now, let's talk about your own research. What exactly did you focus on in your essay?
My essay focuses on whether or not Adrienne Rich uses the figure of Emily Dickinson and her poem. I was interested in exploring the connections between the two poems, not just in terms of theme, but as a part of a larger historical and literary evolution in women's writing. Even though Dickinson and Rich lived in different time periods, their poems both challenge the cultural and literary system that have historically excluded women from positions of intellectual and creative authority. Dickinson's poem reflects on a kind of proto-feminist resistance, while Reed's poem is more explicit feminist and politically charged. But what really fascinated me is how both use poetic strategies to express the struggles against gender repressions. Through this comparison, I wanted to trace the development of feminism literary expression across time.
Why did you choose these authors? What drew you to make this connection?
That's a great question. I was studying North American literature, especially postmodernism, and one of the authors who caught my attention was Adrienne Rich. And in section 4 of her poem, there is a clear reference on Emily Dickinson's writing, one of her most famous poems, My Life Has Stood a Loaded Gun. And suddenly I got this bright idea. A few months earlier, during my Erasmus, a friend gave me for my birthday a collection of poems by Emily Dickinson, and I remember commenting on They Shut Me Up in Prose in particular, so I said, why not? Since both texts are widely studied individually, my intention was to make a direct comparison of both of them.
Did you find anything surprising during your research? What caught your attention?
Yes, actually, I did find something really surprising during my research. I expected that both poems would share some literary devices like symbolism, irony, or juxtaposition. After all, they are both expressing themselves poetically, and it's common for poets to use those tools to deal with complex issues like injustice or oppression. But what truly caught my attention was that both Dickinson and Rich use the same metaphor, like the image of an intrepid bird. This metaphor appears in both poems as a symbol of the suppression of female voice and creativity. In Dickinson's They Shut Me Out in Prose, the speaker compared herself to a bird being locked away, trapped and silent. It is subtle, but it speaks volumes about how she felt intellectually confined just because she was a woman. Then, when I looked at Rich's snapshot of a daughter-in-law, I noticed a very similar image. There is a moment in the poem when the speaker feels quotes, caged and emotionally trapped, yet still capable of transformation or flight. And that image reminds me so strongly of Dickinson as it feels like an echo. What's powerful is how both poems in different centuries come back to the same image to describe what it feels like to be a woman with thoughts, ambition, and a creative voice in a world that constantly tells you to stay quiet, to be small, to support others, but never to speak up to yourself. The bird becomes more than just a metaphor. It becomes a shared symbol of resistance and frustration. It shows how little some things have changed between their times, and at the same time, how poetry gave both of them a way to fight back.
And how do you think your research helps us understand the text better?
I think my research helps readers to understand the deeper connection between the two poems, not just in terms of a literary technique, but also in how they both express a shared emotional and social reality. By identifying mutual themes like intellectual confinement, gender based oppression, and the silent theme of female voices, the analysis shows that Adrienne Rich's poems doesn't just echo Emily Dickinson's, it continues and amplifies the conversation that Dickinson began a century earlier. It's honestly a little heartbreaking to realize that despite the time gap, both women were writing about the same struggle, being underestimated, being told to stay silent, being denied full creativity freedom because of their gender. And what makes this even more powerful and also kind of sad is that this theme still resonates today. As a reader and as a woman, I found myself relating to that same feeling of being boxed in or dismissed, and I think many others do too. That's what really motivated this research. Even though I'm not writing poetry myself, this close analysis became a way to engage with other voices and to recognize that what they were denouncing is still being denounced too now. That is also what really motivated this research. Even though I'm not writing poetry myself, this close analysis became a way to engage with their voices and to recognize that what they were denouncing is still being denounced now. This resistance, their desire to speak and to be heard, is not just historical, it's ongoing. And I hope that by bringing these two voices together in conversation, my research helps highlight the long and continuing journey of women's claiming their space in literature and in society. That message is what I really hope comes through.
This has been such a fascinating and engaging conversation. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your research and helping us understand these fascinating poems from a new perspective. Now, I will definitely check on Adrienne Rich's work and try to draw a parallel with what I know about Dickinson. It is crucial to raise awareness of these female authors who have been silenced many times.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here and having the chance to talk about my work.
And thanks to our listeners. This has been another episode in our North American Literature podcast series by the Studies in American Literature and Culture Research Group at the University of Granada. Stay tuned for more. I hope you enjoyed this new topic. And remember, Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.